Well, welcome everybody to another edition of the Art Business Podcast. And my guest today is James Ward, who is the founder and director of JC Gallery, which is a relatively newly opened gallery in Mayfair in London. So welcome, James. Thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. So James, straight into the desert island disc questions. Your favorite city?
My favorite city, I think, that's a tricky one. I think obviously, I think New York is a very special city. It really has this real charm to it, and I call it a bit of a harsh charm because, yeah, everyone's quite brash. You have to adapt, but you kind of can't help but fall in love with the place. It sort of feels a little bit of a home from home, I suppose, very similar to London, but has a different feel. And I think it's lovely. The other city I would say that I'm very fond of is Chicago. Chicago is a city that I feel is full of culture. It hasn't quite developed in terms of its gallery spaces and being as clearly as fruitful as New York is. But Chicago has something about it that's got everything. You know, it's really got quite a vibrant scene culturally. I think it might blossom into something quite special, Chicago. I think it's lovely.
I have never been to Chicago. I've been to New York several times, and I totally agree. I think that's a very good description from a Brit about being an Englishman in New York, all that stuff. Yeah, and it's one of those places that when you go to, you have this image, you have a kind of almost like movie image in your mind, I always think about New York. And on one level, you're kind of disappointed, on another level, I think I was a bit disappointed the first time because I was going to kind of bars and cafes and restaurants, and it was just like being in London. You know, there were a lot of like immigrant people who were serving me, and I wanted to speak to some, I think they were newly immigrant, if you like, and they hadn't
Yeah.
become what I would call full New Yorkers yet. And someone just said to me, "Oh, go down to Greenwich Village and go to some jazz clubs. People are very
Yes.
intimate." And friendly, and that's what I did. And I started chatting to people, and
Yeah.
there's a
Very
little bit of advice to
friendly.
people there.
Yes, it's funny you should say that because my colleague and I, we go to New York every year. We keep in touch with a lot of dealers and galleries in New York, and we actually went early January, and we find going in the second week of January, it's quite quiet in the art scene. People are still kind of waking up, and it's a good time to go.
Yeah.
And the city's not too busy. And I did exactly what you just described. Went to Greenwich Village, and I found a lovely little jazz club around the corner. It's in a basement here. And, you really can't help but submerging yourself in that scene, that sort of jazz culture scene that's there. But you have to go looking for it. It's not going to jump out at you.
Yeah, and I found they were so friendly. I mean, I can't remember now the first one I went to. I remember the musician because I still, that's when I first saw him and heard him, a guy called Bill Charlap, who's a pianist. He has a little trio, fairly trad jazz stuff, but wonderfully musical. And, the piano, he's brilliant on the piano. And then I met someone there, amazing, I can't even remember her name, amazing woman, double bassist jazz player who the next year I saw whether she was doing anything. She was playing with Les Paul,
Wow.
the
Yeah.
famous Les Paul guitar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw her I saw her there, but she said, "Oh, she just gave me a whole list of other things going on that night, not just that
Oh,
week."
well.
So she just said, just after this, because you'll remember that there's strange little sessions, aren't they? And then you have to get out, and
Yes.
another lot of people come in. So
Yeah.
I went to another two clubs that night until like the early hours of the morning, and it was really good
That's
fun, and
great.
everyone was
So
so
much
friendly.
fun. Yeah. Yeah. It's so fun.
No, anyway, so New York, yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously we could spend the whole podcast talking about your interest in like old masters and American modernism that we'll obviously come to, and how amazing New York is like London for lots of different collections with that material in. But
Mm.
we can
Yeah.
come, yeah, go on.
it's just that New York, it's so new. It feels new, you
Yeah,
know? It feels like it's kind of still
yeah,
not developing. It's obviously it's the one of the it's the biggest art city in the world, but it's just it feels so adaptable and obviously London has so much charm, so much heritage, so much depth there. But New York feels like it's you can really be a part of something special and sort of thinking about the modernists in the early 20th century, that's the city was still in a state of flux just a century ago. It was still building, going through this huge industrial revolution. So when I visit, I often think about that and think, gosh, that's so interesting that it's still you've got to remind yourself that it's still quite a young city.
absolutely. I mean, I was just thinking that even the kind of iconic older buildings are later than that early
Yeah,
American modernism period. I'm thinking of the Flatiron building. That wasn't built when they were working.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting actually because a lot of New Yorkers might be surprised at what you've just said, but I think coming from like the UK, it does the UK does in some ways feel less versatile and adaptable because of that heritage
So true.
history. Yeah, and I think New York, what it's got going for it is that it's still developing and adapting and being versatile. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
agree.
totally.
So do you have any kind of places that you go to chill out in, like countryside or ski locate, anything like that that's outside of
Yeah.
the urban environment?
Well, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I do love skiing, and I do find skiing quite therapeutic. But for me, particularly if I want to just get out of London, and I really love the countryside. I am a country boy at heart, really, to be honest. Um, but very much enjoy living in the city. It's just I love to go to the Northamptonshire countryside, which is where I grew up. It's full of familiarity for me. It's full of people that I know. It's full of this very community-based structure. It's all farmers that sort of help each other. Very it's very safe, and walking around the countryside in Northamptonshire, it's so sort of beautiful and untouched. I mean, there's hardly any flat land in Northamptonshire. It's not rolling hills, but it's sort of it's just beautiful scenic countryside. I don't think there's any better countryside for me anyway than Northamptonshire. It's got everything, and I really love occasionally at the weekends, you're going to Northamptonshire, walking the dogs around the fields, and it's that peace that you find where you don't hear anything. You just hear the noises of the trees, the wind, the rain. I know this it sounds crazy, but just the sound of the rain in the countryside sounds different to the rain in London or in the city. It's
Definitely.
just it's lovely. I actually really enjoy it, and it's that peace that just to be able to walk and sort of be in the fresh air. It's essential for me to survive.
I totally agree with you. I have exactly the same feelings about the countryside. And, I think at the start of COVID, a lot of us were tempted to kind of move out. And I mean, I suspect you're similar to me in as much as I really don't want to leave the city. And I worry that I mean it's nice for you because if you go back to Northamptonshire, you have roots there. Whereas all of my roots have kind of gone. They weren't in such a romantic, my upbringing wasn't in such a romantic setting as like John Clare's Northamptonshire. I was just thinking
Yes, John Clare.
yeah, John Clare is this great for the benefit
Mm.
of the listeners. John Clare's this amazing, was he 18th century or 19th?
Yes, he was. He
18th
was
century poet.
incredible poet.
Yeah,
Oh,
who wrote poems about Northamptonshire. And I'm afraid I'm ashamed to say I still haven't investigated Northamptonshire. My
oh,
my son has, and he keeps saying, "Oh, you must go out there for the reasons that you said that you really,
yes.
it's not an obvious place to go, which probably makes it
No,
even
it's
more
not.
attractive."
You're absolutely right. I mean, it doesn't have much to offer, I'm afraid, other than the rural side of things.
Yeah.
And the other place that I'm very fond of is Norfolk. I think
Yes.
that's a beautiful part of the world, and something that it's got some really lovely gems there, you know, lovely beaches that they're not the prettiest beaches, but they're really well looked after. And there's you sort of transported back into sort of the 1950s almost in
Yeah.
Norfolk.
Yeah.
It's just a lovely way of life. Um,
That is somewhere I know very well.
yes.
The North Norfolk coast in particular.
Yes,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
same here. Yes,
Yeah.
my grandfather lived in Norfolk for the last sort of period of his life, and in North Walsham,
Yes.
which is in North Norfolk. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, we could carry on talking about it. What I would say to people is that when you talk, I mean, and I think a lot of the listeners, particularly the younger ones you know, the Gen Zs who suffered lockdown in such a bad way, I would say, you know, if they were still studying at university. Um, you know, everybody is thinking about mindfulness now, and you know, I
Mm.
think the way you very beautifully describe the listening to the rain and the wind without any distractions, you do get that in London. But I mean, I'm under a flight path living at Kew Gardens, unfortunately, although Kew Gardens itself is beautiful.
Yes, it is.
But we have to. I don't know whether you can hear it, but there's a plane going over my head like every 90 seconds,
Oh,
and it's
right.
when I get out to Norfolk that I love it because I just switch off and I listen and I can hear the birds properly without any kind of competing distractions. Anyway,
Yes.
favorite building? Do you have a favorite building?
My favorite building, I think it has to be Althorp for me. Sorry to be so.
No. I think for
That'll
the
be
benefit, sorry to interrupt, but I think for the benefit of the listeners, that was a question we were going to talk. I was going to ask you obviously later, but maybe
okay.
now you could say a little bit about, you know, most of the listeners won't have been to Author. I'm ashamed to say I still haven't. Every year I
Ah,
look it up on its website and work out if I can get up there. Almost
yes.
certainly this year I will do, particularly after speaking to you. So far away, and tell us all about Althorp House.
Well, I don't know where to begin with Althorp. It was built in 1508. It was built by the Spencer family for the Spencer family. So it's had 19 generations of the Spencer family within it. And what is so special about Althorp is that, you know, it is how it was built. You know, it's been in one family's ownership since its conception. I think that's what's lovely about it, is that every earl that's inherited Althorp has contributed to it, added to it. It's been a growth of a collection within that house of art, furniture, ceramics, all sorts of chattels. And that's so special because I don't think there are many stately homes in England that are privately owned that have that kind of wealth of art within it. I mean, it's full of 17th century old masters, you know, Rubens, Gainsborough, Van Dyck, Joshua Reynolds. I mean, you name it, it's got everything. And it's a lived-in family home. And that's what's beautiful about it. It's not the sort of stately home that's, you know, quite often you'd go and visit, perhaps it's a National Trust property. And you can feel it's a little bit cold. You know, it's sort of maybe dusty, sort of muggy feeling. There is none of that at Althorp. It's fresh. It's got a real magical charm to it. And you definitely get that feeling when you're walking around the house. Um, I think that's why I would choose that as my favorite building, because when you're walking around Althorp, you walk on the floorboards that, you know, kings and queens have walked upon, and some amazing stories. You know, I really do want to hammer home the fact that it hasn't really changed for over 500 years. And the portraits on the walls and the scenes, they all have these wonderful stories. So King Charles I learned the signing of his death warrant whilst he was playing bowls on the front lawns of Althorp. And there are these wonderful stories. There's the picture gallery up in Althorp, which is a 60-foot long room that was designed for ladies in long dresses to walk in when it was raining and muddy outside. They'd use it to exercise. So 15 times up and down is a mile. And there's these portraits of what we call the Windsor beauties, and they're all essentially mistresses of Charles II. So when the king would come and visit Althorp, the thing to do to stay in keeping with the king was to have a portrait done of his current mistress and hang it on the wall. And they're all, I mean, he certainly had a type. When you go to Althorp, you'll see it. But I love those stories that it's just fascinating. And that I could go on and on about the artwork at Althorp and the connection also with the family. So what surprises me is that obviously portraits in those days were a snapshot in time, almost a historical document. And they were all essentially selfies. You know, we're kind of doing the same thing now. Nothing's really changed. It's just we're doing it in a digital way on a mobile. But that was the way things were done back in those days, and it's got such rich English history. You honestly you get lost in it.
I'm so looking forward to it. One of the questions I was going to ask, because this is an art business podcast, many of our English country houses, have been badly hit in different periods by inheritance tax, particularly after World War II and so on. What I was going to ask you is, have they, in your knowledge, have they had to sell off any of that art collection at any period?
Well, to tell you the truth, no. I mean, we have, I know Lord Spencer cleared out the attics at one point and had an attic sale. But to be honest, the estate in general has been extremely well managed over the years, and farming is a big part of the estate, and that's essentially how they make most of their money. I mean, the Spencer family were originally sheep farmers. That's how they made their money originally, and that's sort of continued to this day. Really, they obviously have an estate in Norfolk too called North Creek, which backs onto Sandringham. And various properties and things in properties in London too. So they've been very smart, very clever, and we've also held a number of events at Althorp too. We had a literary festival which went for 15, 16 years, and lovely events like that which have helped contribute. Yeah.
Yeah, and for the benefit of the listeners again, I know that that kind of property and the way it's structured and run, if I'm right, correct me if I'm wrong, James, but presumably they benefit from the in lieu of inheritance tax scheme, whereby so long as they open the collection to the public a certain number of days per year, they don't have to suffer inheritance tax, which is currently 40% in the UK, and
Yes.
that if hopefully it won't happen soon. If when the Earl dies, the descendants have to pay that tax on the whole estate, which includes the value of the art collection. And one way of avoiding that is just keeping open to the public. It happens a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's true. And it is a real balance, because that house, whether it's open or not, it costs a lot of money to keep up, the repair and such. And yes, it's that would be crippling, for an estate like that to have that. It would be such a whopping great amount. But Lord and Lady Spencer have done a fantastic job of keeping the house. Keeping it up. There was a huge renovation project. I would have, gosh, it'd be about 15 or so years ago, where the roof was redone, and there was 83 tons of lead that had to be repaired on the roof of Althorp. It was an 18-month conservation project. That's not cheap, and to keep that going is really impressive. Yeah.
Yeah. And are they some of the other similar houses that I've been to? And if listeners are interested, if you look up Historic House Association, these kind of houses aren't owned by charitable organisations like the National Trust and English Heritage now. They're a part of this. Many of them are part of this organisation called Historic Houses Association. It's well worth looking at. You can actually join it as a member every year, and then you get all this information about when you can visit some of these places that many members of the public don't know about and haven't been to at all. I assume that Althorp is part of HHA.
They are actually. They are. So members are able to visit Althorp under that membership. Yeah.
No, exactly. What I was going to ask, I was thinking of someone like Houghton Hall in Norfolk, which you will
Oh,
probably
yes.
and again still lived in by I think the Chumleys, if I remember
I think
rightly.
you're
And
right. Yes.
yeah, and that was an example of where they had to sell off an amazing art collection because of, I think, probably gambling, or it usually was and it was sold to the Catherine the Great,
Oh,
and most of it
wow.
is now in the Hermitage. And then a few years ago, of course, the Hermitage, when we were when we were on good terms with Russia,
Yeah.
lent all of this back, and they repositioned the paintings back in situ, which was an amazing. I don't know if you went to that. What I was going to ask about that place is they're still very much into contemporary, so there's still patrons of contemporary artists like Richard Long. Uh,
Yes.
do you and Turrell, are the Spencers still patrons of contemporary artists to any extent?
Yes, very much
Yes.
so. Very much so. Lord Spencer's very much got his finger on the pulse of contemporary art. And it's really amazing. He's been very bold and hung some quite contemporary works in the house alongside some of the greats. There's one work that's just meters away from a Van Dyck, and you do think, gosh, that's it. Somehow it works. You think in your mind, as a curator, you think, gosh, it's got to be either a stark contrast or have some sort of thread there, but it works quite beautifully.
Yeah, no, I think it's really good. I think when I think of a lot of the British aristocrats at the moment, um, some of them are less into supporting contemporary artists, but I have an admiration for those that continue to. I'm thinking of people like the Devonshires at Chatsworth. They still
Yes.
seem to support a lot of contemporary artists as well. Before, I think we might come back to Althorp when we're talking
Sure.
about your bio to date, James. But I just wanted to, listeners might be interested in your musical tastes. Could you speak about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think,
I've already
David,
talked about jazz.
yeah, jazz. I do really love. I must say I struggle sometimes with jazz that's a little bit off-piste, shall we say, that sort of goes on a little bit of a tangent. I prefer jazz that has much more of a structured rhythm that you can sort of get into, and a sort of repetitive musical element. That's the sort of jazz that I really like. The old sort of 1950s
Yeah, no,
jazz,
same here.
which, yeah, yeah. But I have very eclectic tastes. I listen to all sorts of different things. I also I quite like country music as well. I have got into country music a little bit.
Do you mean American in the American sense, or do you mean folk music in the British sense?
No, actually, it's more the American
Yeah,
sense, and that's only because, like all things, you have to sort of experience it live to really get a real taste of what it's about. And I was very fortunate to be. I was in Chicago with some friends of mine, and we went to a country concert. We had absolutely no idea who this chap was, what the concert would be like, what the atmosphere would be like. Had absolutely no preconceived ideas. Went to this concert, and it was unbelievable. It's a guy called Morgan Wallen who I've now sort of followed, and he did one tour date in the UK recently, and he is fantastic. I mean, I think what I love about it is with country music, it tells a story quite often, a
yeah,
story that you can really get your teeth into. It feels like it's from the heart. It feels very personal. It feels quite contemporary. When you think of country music, perhaps you think of, a barn dance sort of thing. It's not like that at all. There's a very contemporary country music singers that I feel very relevant, and I sort of get into them a little bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think the lovely thing about country music and then British folk music is that because you don't, the big thing isn't to write it down, and because if you write it down, and particularly the lyrics, it gets stuck in a period. Whereas because it's sort of passed on orally and by through memory most of the time, people just end up adding their more contemporary verses sometimes, and I think that's what you're getting at there. So it again has the sense of someone like Althorpe that you're in a kind of very you're aware you're listening to something quite traditional that, i.e., is being handed down generation to generation, but you're also aware if it's a good musician that they're adding some of their contemporary vibes to it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's and I like the way that, quite often they all have different tempos, you know, so it doesn't feel too samey to me. Yeah, it's a fantastic and also super inclusive crowd. It's a bit like the jazz scene, you know, everyone's so they're into the music,
Yeah.
you know, and they're into the message in the music.
Yeah.
They'd really embrace that, and if you're part of that, they bring you in. They bring you
Yes.
into their club, and I really like that. Very inclusive.
I think that that's something, another thing that might have got lost during COVID-19 is, particularly for younger people, you and I are just used to a culture where you were kind of almost expected by your peer group to go to live music events, not just the
Yeah.
obvious big stadium events, but to go to the pub on the corner and listen to some folk music, or it might have
Mm.
a little concert hall at the back, and there's a great new rock band over from Dublin. I, I can just think of loads of stories like that. But it's a community, isn't it? And you go
Yeah.
back and you see the same people there a lot of the
It's
time.
true. It's so true. And
Yeah,
it's lovely. It feels warm. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. This is a difficult question, about art. But so I'm going to be really. I'm going to be really strict on this. So if someone put a
Yeah.
gun against your head and said, right, you've got to choose a work of art to take to that desert island, just one,
Oh
what would it
gosh.
be?
Oh, just one. Oh my goodness. Um, Gosh, well, there is a reason why I deal in American modernism,
Hmm.
and I love Arthur Dove's work
Yeah.
in particular. But if I was to go on a contemporary scene, I probably would choose some work by maybe Tracy Emin. I
Really,
think
that's
her
interesting.
work is superb. I think the way that she's creating work at the moment, where it's sort of those beautiful mark making works that she's doing are just wonderful, and they leave. For me, I love to really think about an artwork. I like to see something and then I like to think about it afterwards. I like that entertainment of having to really explore that in my mind after I've seen it. And for me, Tracy Emin's work does that for me. You know, those very sort of beautiful lines that she creates, and it doesn't reveal too much. And for me, the entertainment is up here to sort of really explore that and think about it and really get into the meaning of it. And I think that's why Tracy Emin's work really appeals to me.
Yeah, I must say I'm surprised. I thought that you'd come up with like an old master or an early 20th century American work. So that I think that's wonderfully wonderful, and I totally agree with you. I think and Tracy's Cape, one of those. I think the reason the YBAs, the Young British Artists, or one of the reasons they became so successful is they didn't mind producing some work that was more commercial, like the neons are probably one might go for with Tracy Emin. All of our any of our students who've come, well, they will. My current students will be doing this in a couple of weeks' time when we're off to the Netherlands for Master at the European Fine Art Fair,
Amazing.
because we're
What
leaving
a
St
great
Pancras,
trip.
and of course there's a Tracy Emin neon as you above the station in St Pancras. And,
Yes.
and and there's something about her work which is so moving because of her very her biography is very, very touching and emotional, as you
Mm.
probably know. And I think when you see those beautifully very simple sort of poetic written statements in neon, you've got to know Tracy Emin and her
It's
background
so
to
true.
understand where that's coming from. And it's just so direct and pure. And the
Mm.
line of that you're probably thinking more about her drawings, but the line of those drawings, I think, is in the calligraphy of the handwriting as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. She reveals all, you know, she lays everything out there.
Yeah.
She is unapologetic. She is she is who she is. And I think that's really lovely in a world where perhaps, you know, within the likes of say Instagram, where we don't tend to reveal, you know, the boring elements of our lives or the slightly darker elements of our lives. Tracy is out there
Mm.
showing everything and revealing everything and wanting you to feel that. And that's what I sort of am drawn towards, you know,
Yeah,
that
and
exposure.
I love her honesty. I saw her in an interview once, and she she's one of those people who's just incredibly honest. and the press have a
Mm,
bit of a go at her, saying, "Oh, she comes on drunk," or what, or used to. You know, and she, as you say, she just totally speaks her mind. She's up
mm,
front, and of course, that's why we have artists. We expect them
yeah,
to do things that we can't do in our own
yeah.
work and careers. You know,
So true.
you
Yeah,
couldn't
so
behave like Tracy Emin if you're working at Althorp, for example, probably.
no, no.
Well, until the doors are closed, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to come back to that a little bit now, talk a little bit more about you and your life in the art world, James.
Mm,
So
mm.
I think you completed your bachelor's degree in performing arts at Winchester, I think, if I
Yes.
remember, and that in itself is interesting. That you were doing performing arts, and then
Mhm.
I believe that you went pretty straight to work in events at Althorp.
Yeah.
And Althorp, as James already said, it's best known to most of us as the home of the Spencer family. And for those of you from a younger generation who can't remember this, this of course was the home of Princess Diana, rest in peace. Her brother is the current Earl. Um,
Mm.
so that is one of the reasons, I guess, that the house has kind of, you know, has become more famous and probably is more visited more recently. Diana, bless her, is as I understand it, buried on an island in a lake there. But and you've already said something about the collection, but maybe you could say something more about what was your role there and what, you know, what was a day in the life of James Ward when he was at Althorp, a working life.
Well, I mean, I was very blessed there. I worked for His Lordship for 15 years, and I started, when I just was at university, and it was the perfect job to have during the summer when you came back from university because it was a really nice place to work. You were surrounded by other students doing exactly the same thing and the retired too. It was a beautiful balance of that's sort of the guidance of the older generation and then our the students coming back, and it was just such a wonderful combo and it really worked. um but I kind of started just by doing everything, cleaning the loos, and stuff like that, right from day one. And I sort of worked my way up. I started, as cafe manager for a little time whilst we were open to the public. Then I started doing events and running some of the events, the literary festival, and then being much more working much more within the realm of the house itself. I became general manager and worked very closely with the family and their private events within the house. If they're entertaining guests that came, family that came, and it was it was really hard work, David. I'm not going to lie, but it didn't really feel like hard work because I enjoyed it so much. And I you know, long days, long hours, quite a lot. It's like managing an army, to be honest, on
Sure.
an estate like that. And it's so personal too, because whilst it's a very large estate, it's got sort of 35 full-time members of staff if you include, the gardeners, gamekeepers, and foresters and everything. But everyone was pulling in one direction, and if we ever had someone that wasn't pulling in the right direction, they didn't last long because they just didn't fit in. And everyone was so dedicated to Althorp and the family. And um, so yeah, from an operational perspective, there was quite a lot under my remit at one time, and I'm just so blessed to have had that opportunity. I look back at it with very fond memories. It is a bit of a young man's game, I think. Someone that is sort of switched on and able to commit themselves fully to the role. You cannot, in a role like that, be half in, half out. You've got to be fully dedicated to the role. Um, but yeah, as I say, it was an incredible time of my life, and I still sort of keep in touch with the estate now, which is great.
That's lovely. And I think again particularly for my current students and younger alumni, you know, we're always saying to them, this isn't the, you know, you've been studying art because you love it, but it's hard. If you want to actually stay in that and work in it, it's not easy. I've
Yeah.
never known any of my alumni come to me and say, "Oh, it's an easy job. You know, I go in at 9, switch off at 5, and that's it." You've got to be expected like 24/7 in a lot of those jobs. You know, you might suddenly be called upon to fly out to New York, maybe courier a work back. You know, all
Exactly,
sorts of things
exactly.
happen. But it is
Yeah.
exciting. But if you want to be in that exciting art, art world, you've got to be prepared to pull your weight.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make there. I think you've just got to be dedicated and not be a clock watcher. You've
Yeah.
got to be there until the job's done and be, you know, in it fully for the great for the better of the estate. You know, you're all working to achieve a certain level of standard service. It's the attention to detail really that goes an enormous way in a sort of house like that. You've really got to build relationships within your team, communicate very well, and it is a sort of a real team game, that sort of job.
Do you think having studied performing arts that might have helped you develop your character and personality, or were you just naturally always a good team player?
I think I was probably always had a team ethic, but what that doing that degree helped me is with my confidence and my relationship building with people. You know, I grew up in rural Northamptonshire, you know, went to an all boys school. It was, I was sort of very sheltered. And I think going to university and doing a performing arts degree where you have to devise theatre, you have to think creatively, you have to put yourself on stage, you have to expose yourself, you know, you have to kind of be very forthcoming. And I think that did me the world of good in terms of sort of being much more confident and sort of really trusting in building relationships with people.
Yeah, I often say to my any of my we've got we were talking about this before the podcast began. You know, I think COVID had a profound effect on young people coming through the system now, and we've noticed that a lacking of confidence in some of our increasing number of our students. Not their fault. I think it's just to do with, not the strangeness of lockdowns.
Mm,
I
mm.
have, if someone says, "Oh, I'm really scared about the presentations next week," I tend to say to them, "Look, if you're scared of public speaking, go along the Marylebone Road to the Royal Academy of Music, and if you just walk in, if you look at the notice board, you'll find current music students, offering singing lessons, like aspiring
Yeah,
opera singers.
yeah,
Go and do a few lessons." And they say, "Well, I'm not musical." I said, "Just go. That you'll
yeah.
love it." And they come back and they said, "Look, I haven't got a voice. I'm totally, unmusical, but I can now sing." And suddenly that develops the confidence. I think there are ways that you can actually train yourselves to come out of that shell.
Definitely, definitely. When I was at school, I did speech and drama lessons, and I think my parents thought that'd be a really good thing for me because they probably saw quite a shy boy in me at a
Mm.
young age. And as part of those talk, you know, you had to create a presentation,
Yes.
and there were only a few of us doing it. You know, I think three of us doing it. And before my exam, our headmistress thought it would be a good idea that we did our presentation in front of the entire school. But my chosen subject at the time, having grown up around horses, was that I was talking about the horse's bridle, and in particular the mouthpiece, which is called a bit. And anyway, the thing that really broke my, well, sort of, I suppose, made me to be able to sort of handle anything was that the headmistress sort of announced to the school, said, "Well, James is now going to do a talk in advance of his speech and drama exam, and he's going to be talking about horses' bits." And of course, the school just erupted. Even the tutors couldn't stop laughing, and no one listened to a word that I had to say
Oh,
because they were
bless.
still laughing too much. But I think that was a pivotal moment for me that I just thought, well, I don't think he can get much worse than that, to be honest.
That's really funny. So, in moving on, in 2019, having worked at Althorp for a number of years, you moved into what I would say is the commercial art world, away from
Mm,
heritage, very different, very. bold move, if I may say so. And you became a gallery manager at Clarendon Fine Art. And that
Yeah.
job, as I believe it, lasted about a year, during which it sounds as though you continued to educate yourselves. You took a couple of certificate courses at Sotheby's Institute of Art. I wonder if you could just say a little bit about those courses and whether they kind of helped you in your practical commercial gallery management.
Yeah, they certainly did. I think those were essential for me to do. I knew coming out of Althorp, not really knowing, whether this would be the right path for me. So I threw myself into the art world, and I really wanted, and when I say throw myself, I just wanted to learn as much as I could. And doing those courses was a way of submerging myself.
Mhm.
Um, I knew how to manage a team, and I knew going into Clarendon and managing a gallery there, I knew that that would be sort of second nature to me. But I guess I'm not a natural salesman. And working in a commercial gallery, heavily commercial gallery like that, I knew that it wasn't quite what I wanted to do.
Sure.
I'm much more of a sort of relationship building art dealer. I really want to sort of grow a collection with somebody and sort of get to know them and have that trust element. Being able to advise them is important.
Yes.
Advise them in the right way. And doing those courses at Sotheby's just kind of accentuated my thinking, understanding exactly what area I wanted to go into, what part of the art world I liked and what I didn't like, because I think that's important. If you're in this industry, you want to be involved in the art world, and there's something that's gravitating you towards it. But I do think it's important to identify where your strengths are and how to apply those within the art world, because it's like anything in life. If you're not passionate about it and it's not natural to you, and you want to find what feels natural and what feels like something that you really truly believe in, that's when you'll succeed. That's when you'll really go on to achieve something great. And I think doing those courses at Sotheby's really helped my depth of knowledge in the art world, but kind of helped me identify the route that I wanted to go down.
Can you remember the titles of those courses?
One of them was quite simply a history of art
Okay, yeah, just
course, which I hugely enjoyed,
yeah.
because whilst I knew about the 17th century old masters, I hadn't really gone back much further than that. And it
Mm.
was really great to learn sort of about the Greek period and areas like that. And and then the other one was, I believe, managing a contemporary gallery.
Right. Yeah.
And that was great in terms of when I was thinking about setting up my own gallery. It really went through pretty much all of the pitfalls to look out for.
Mhm.
What kind of financial support you'd need to start a gallery. All of those sort of little elements that probably I would have made quite a lot of mistakes had I not done that course.
Mm.
So it was essential, really, for me.
That's good to know. And then in in the unfortunate year 2020, the start of COVID, you did um, fulfill that ambition of setting up your own
Mm,
gallery, and you became
yeah.
the founder and director of JC Gallery. For the benefit of the listeners, it's situated on Hay Hill, which is actually one of the, you don't think of London as being very hilly, but of course there's all this geology that the river valley, I believe it is, to do with all the steps down to the river,
Yes,
and that is a kind of curious sort of hill in the middle of Mayfair.
it's
But
true.
any reasons why you chose that location? And are you sitting there now?
No, I'm not. No,
You're at
I'm not,
home. No, I
I'm
just
not
wondered.
at
I
home
just
at the
wondered.
moment.
Because I've never
Um,
been, I have to admit to the listeners, I haven't yet been to your gallery, but as I understand it, it's a smaller, more intimate space.
It is. It is. I mean, I think when I was looking at spaces, I knew I didn't want a big space.
Mm,
I knew I wanted something that had charm
mhm,
and had character. This space definitely does. And as you say, it's a small space. It's
mhm,
650 square foot. It's
mm,
tiny compared to some
mm,
of the galleries around me. I'm surrounded by a wealth of incredible galleries that
mm.
have had these huge spaces. But we're sort of tucked away on Hay Hill, and for what we deal in, which is often quite smaller works, not sort of huge grand canvases, There's like, often, you know, some of the works that we have hanging as part of our show at the moment are sort of 5x7 ink and gouache works. They're beautiful little works. So that sort of space really appealed. I think, you know, Mayfair, because we looked at lots of different spaces. We looked at areas maybe in Chelsea or, you know, Kensington. There's lots of galleries in St. James now too. Looked at all over London, but we decided that I think I wanted to be part of what I deemed as the epicenter of one of the greatest art cities in the world. You know, Mayfair has this rich heritage to it that I guess it's that culture in London. It's you're part of something. You feel very much part of something cultural there.
Yeah.
And you know, in some, you know, I'm a sort of stone's throw from the Royal Academy and Cork Street, which obviously is infamous and still has, you know, some lovely hand painted, you know, signs, you know, from the 18th, 19th century. And I really love that.
And thank God that Court Street was saved in
Yes.
those redevelopments and is still very much surviving. So
Yeah.
your specialism, you decided to actually have a small specialist gallery, which I think feeds into the fact it's quite a small space, perhaps. And yeah, I mean, listeners can actually look at your website online and look at some of the works from your current exhibition on American modernism, and you can see there that they're really beautiful, and but they are quite small scale, and
Yes.
that's kind of, so one of the things you're specializing is like small scale work, and often like not the big oils on canvas, but more works on paper.
Mm.
Maybe you could tell us something about why you chose that particular, what we would call art market sector, these American modernists of the early 20th century.
When I opened the gallery, I actually opened with emerging artists,
Mm,
and I did that for a short period. It became very clear to me that it was going to be a real struggle to compete with the galleries around me. You know, I've literally got David Swerner at the top of the road and some other amazing galleries around me. And I thought, gosh, how am I going to
mm,
get some traction here, have an identity, grow as a gallery? And I really had a really long think about it. And I thought, you know, it'd be really good to tell an alternative story. As part of my studies, I sort of focused a lot on American art. And I kind of had this idea that it would be interesting to focus on um, some of the early works, say Warhol, you know, sketches and little notes and anecdotes and, you know, all of those little elements that crafted the artist that he became and the blue chip man that, you know, the incredible artist that we now know. So I was sort of interested in the alternative side, the alternative story. And in my visits to New York and such, and I also visited the Whitney, and luckily I have friends there, and sort of spoke to them about what, you know, my ideas were. And it was actually them that put me on track to look at the American modernists. They said, well, why don't you look at this group of artists? You know, they were creating work in the early 20th century at the same time as Picasso, Matisse, Braque, creating equally incredible work. They were creating work during a time of significant change for America, you know, the Industrial Revolution, immigration pouring into New York, the jazz scene really starting to become extremely vibrant and popular. And anyway, I went away and started researching the likes of Alfred Stieglitz and John Marin and obviously Hopper and O'Keeffe are the big hitters, but also lesser known artists like Arthur Dove.
mm.
And the more that I got into it, the more I thought, I'm kind of getting a bit obsessed with this. You know, it's a bit like Shakespeare in that if you understand Shakespeare and you can get to grasps with the get a grasp of the language, you kind of become a bit obsessed with it. And that's certainly how I became, you know, that getting inside of the artists' heads, and learning about their stories. And they were all about relationships too. they were all about building relationships within themselves as a group of artists, you know, how they'd get their message across. They were creating very, very interesting work at a time where, you know, in the late 19th century, they were just focusing on beautiful landscapes, traditional landscapes and portraiture. And then the likes of Arthur Dove comes along, who is credited as the first American abstract painter, and completely changes the landscape, something really new. And of course, it wasn't particularly well received when they first did it. I remember the Armory Show of 1913, a real pivotal change in American art history is that show, the Armory Show in 1913. And it's crazy to me how one show could have such a significant change on the direction of art history. But the Armory Show 1913 is definitely one of those. It's fascinating. And that really interested me. But I found that element, all of those stories and how it sort of progressed, really fascinating. And I haven't really taken my head out of that era ever since. And so that's really what drew me to that period. And I realized that over the other side of the Atlantic, it's quite a buoyant market for those works. And there's not a single, we are the only gallery in Europe to focus on American modernism. And obviously it's ambitious. There's a reason why there's not a gallery that does it. But I do think that these artists deserve their day in the sun.
I think that if you can find, James, I think if you can, as a business plan and strategy, and particularly for a small group of staff, I don't know whether, is it just you working or do you have two or three?
I have a gallery manager who's exceptional, and we work incredibly well together. And then we have an administrator too.
Yeah, so you're not, you know, it's not a lot of you, but that it's perfect, I think, to find a niche there. And it sounds as though you actually have found a niche. And then I guess it's just a case of marketing yourself, and so that you're the go-to person when people are thinking about where to buy the smaller scale works by the American modernists. And as you say, the big hitters are people like that all listeners will know Edward Hopper, and all listeners will know Georgia O'Keeffe.
Yes. Yeah.
And but not so much for these sort of lesser known sort of media works, as it were. And of course, this is a great niche for collectors who are aren't very interested in the big canvases, but are interested in the collecting works on paper. And I guess it's also arguably a good sort of starting point for collectors who are interested in that period to develop their own confidence in understanding where these artists are coming from before they go for the big canvases. But I also, it's very evident, James, from the way you describe that you're interested in their stories. And, you know, obviously story is a big word over the last few years in terms of marketing. And my students are very aware that, you know, one of the key things that any artist needs if you're going to sell them, and it can be an ancient Roman sculpture to emerging artists, they've got to have a good story. But for you to be able to actually put this to the potential, you know, buyer. And obviously those artists have amazing stories.
Yeah, I mean, people love to talk about, you know, their artwork. It's a reflection of your character. There's a reason why we buy artwork. It's because it resonates with us in one way or another. It has an effect on us, on our feeling. It evokes a mood of some sort. Those are the reasons why we buy artwork. Of course, there is an investment element to it, but really, when it comes down to it, you have to really love an artwork to buy it too. And it is very much those stories that. And I think they're lovely to be able to have something like that hanging in your home and someone noticing it and you being able to tell the story behind it. It's such a lovely feeling. And that's really why I do it. This is why I'm in this world. You know, it's for those stories.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your current exhibition, i.e. the facts. What is the title of the exhibition, and when it's running to?
Yeah, so our current show is called Seven Americans, and it's based on a show that Alfred Stieglitz put on in 1925. Alfred Stieglitz he was a gallerist. He was an acclaimed photographer in his own right. He really was, I guess, he's been credited as the sort of American artist who changed photography from a historical documentation into an art form. He started doing some incredible photography, but he was full of ambition. He championed these artists and pulled them all together and showed them at his various different galleries. I mean, he had 4 or 5 galleries in succession, all based in New York. His most famous one probably is 291 Gallery, which is named after the address in New York. But Seven Americans was a show that he put on that was really quite pivotal for him and for the artist. It was a huge success. Alfred Stieglitz is also someone who brought Picasso to America for the first time. If you haven't read Picasso's War by Hugh Aiken, I really recommend that. It's such a wonderful book, has these lovely anecdotes of, how Stieglitz brought Picasso to America and had claimed about 83 Picasso works. And the show, unfortunately, was a total flop. And Alfred Stieglitz bought one of the works himself and sold one of the works to a big collector, which left 81 artworks, all sorts of different medium, of course, but had to get rid of 81. And he tried to sell them to the Met, which was the wealthiest institution at the time, for $2,000. And the Met said no, that no one will ever go for Picasso's artwork. And if he can, that's incredible when you think, I think in those days, I think a Rembrandt sold for about $500,000, just to put it into perspective. So $2,000, and the Met said no. So all of those lovely stories are included in that book. But so Stieglitz was really this amazing gallerist and really pushed forward abstraction in American art. Really championed Arthur Dove, John Marin, who's also quite a prolific artist of that era, really pushed Marin with his use of watercolor as a medium. And this show really that we've got on is a sort of celebration of that. It's a contemporary exploration of it. We have most of the artists that were involved in that first Seven Americans show. Georgia O'Keeffe was part of that show. It's quite difficult to get O'Keeffe works for an exhibition. People not too keen on sending their works across the Atlantic when it's safe in private collections abroad, which I can totally understand. So it's really our spin on it, and it's sort of a celebration. And it's so fascinating being in the gallery because every now and again you get people coming in that are familiar with these artists and clearly know their importance in the art in art history, and they walk in and the first thing they say, oh my, Arthur Dove, I never thought I'd see Arthur Dove in London, and Charles Demuth, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm seeing this in London. And those are really special moments for me, and I really hope that we can sort of continue along this route.
It sounds so promising, and I wish you real success with it. It would be great if this takes off. Well, you were talking about bringing works for the exhibition across the Atlantic. Are all of those works sourced out of the United States, or are they coming from Europe or this country?
Yeah, I mean, most of them come from private collectors, art dealers, or gallerists in New York.
Yeah.
Predominantly. However, we do have some collectors in the UK that have these works sitting in UK households. So we work with them on whether or not they want to sell, and what time they want to sell, and whether they'd loan us any works for exhibitions and things. So we work with quite a lot of people across the board, really, and institutions too. So we've just started working with the Arthur Dove estate, which is wonderful for us. That was a real sort of groundbreaking thing for us. So we're really pleased with that.
No, that's brilliant. It sounds as though you're reaching out and consolidating contacts, but creating new ones. And as you say, this is quite a niche subject in many, which shouldn't be, but in London it probably is. It sounds as though you are getting people through your doors who know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
You
yeah. I
know,
mean, and it's no surprise that people have focused on European modernists because they were incredible. They were
yep,
pioneers,
yes,
and
it's a little bit like the other way round, inverted. My American students, you talk about Richard Hamilton and Peter Blake. Who are they? And you say, well, they were pop artists in the UK, and they were working pretty much at the same time as your Warhol and so on. And
yeah,
again, it's kind of underrated, isn't it?
yeah.
And it's similar in your case. When does the exhibition finish, by the way?
Oh, it finishes on the 27th of April.
So still quite a way to go. That's good.
Yeah, we've still got some time, and then we move into a focus on Arthur Dove, and it would be the first time that Arthur Dove has ever had a show in Europe. Um,
Yeah,
we're really excited about that, and
that's the future. That's the future show.
yeah,
Focus on Dove.
that opens on the 1st of May.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and again for the listeners, if you look at the works of these seven Americans on James's website, you can look at this work by people like Duff. What I found so enjoyable looking at your entries for those different artists was I'm a classicist by training, so a lot of these artists I was unaware of, to be honest, and I was just really enjoying looking and hearing their stories and realizing how important they were at the time. And I think
Well,
it's
I'm glad
there's
you like
something
them.
really wonderful about resurrecting artists that aren't so well known, even though they should be and were at the time.
Yeah, and they're super collectible too.
Yeah.
It feels like that because a lot of these artworks are over 100 years old, but I do think that quite a lot of them would happily hang alongside contemporary works of this day. I mean, I could easily see an Arthur Dove work hanging next to a Tracy Emin
Yeah.
and it not feeling out of place. It does feel still very relevant. And I
Yes.
think that was one of the things of the gallery. I didn't want it to feel stale.
Yeah.
These artworks are over 100 years old, but there's no reason why it can't be shown in a contemporary gallery such as ours.
Yeah. One of the questions I'd noted down to ask you is like in terms of art business, what would you say is the kind of added value that JC Gallery offers art collectors? What's your ethos?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that question because I had to think long and hard about that because in a world where people can buy art anywhere, quite a lot, people buy artwork on Artsy and online, and things are done by email quite a lot. It's quite hard to build those relationships. And I thought, what can we do that why would they buy an artwork from us and not have it, phone up a New York dealer and buy an artwork from them and then them have it ship it over? What can be our, other than the asset itself, what can be our USP? And really the way that I think about it is that I try to think about it when I buy art, what I really look for. And I decided that the best thing we can do is to make sure that every work that we get and claim, either through private auction or via a dealer, is to have every single work sent to a conservator to clean
Mm.
and then have it placed in safe framing. So ideally, you want to keep the frame that it was originally in. That would be ideal if it's in good shape. But you need to replace the glass, make sure it's UV resistant, all of that stuff. So when people buy an artwork from us, they know it's in the best possible shape that it could be, and that it's in safe framing, so it's going to last for as long as possible. It's in the best possible shape that it could be, and I think that's really something that we're quite proud of that we do.
Oh, it's wonderful. So right up to date in terms of conservation ethics, and I love the idea of retaining as much as you can, but you know, but changing things that need to be changed to
Yes.
preserve the work for the future. I mean, that's a very contemporary conservation ethic, obviously. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, there are a lot of art dealers out there who aren't so good at, they might get an old master uncleaned from an auction at Sotheby's Christie's, Bonhams, or wherever, and and then they might have it really poorly, just to make it look pristine as though it's painted yesterday. And we all know that that can end up actually damaging the work over a period of time. So it's nice to
Yeah.
hear that you're on the ball with like contemporary conservation ethics.
Yes, I think it's really important because they need to be looked after, and even works, because a lot of the works haven't changed hands that often,
Mm,
so they didn't have anti UV art glass
yeah. And I
in
think all the
the
listeners will be aware that when you're dealing a lot with watercolor, that you have to keep it out of the sunlight.
yes. Yes, absolutely. And the heat, don't hang a work above a radiator.
Absolutely. He says, looking around his room. Whoops. No,
Yeah,
I am obviously I'm careful about what I hang over what and what it is.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
there's a limited
absolutely.
amount of wall space.
Well,
And
that's it exactly.
James, maybe you could just tell us something about a typical, maybe a day in your life working in the gallery, the kind of things that you might do from getting into the gallery with your coffee and then,
Yeah.
working through the day.
Yeah, well, it probably won't be a riveting answer, I'm afraid, but really what we do is because everything that we do revolves around American modernism. So we often keep a close eye. So when I get to the gallery, I'll often check ArtNet and read some of the latest news. I like to stay up to date. I think it's really relevant, even though I don't really deal in the contemporary world. I think it's important to understand trends and what people are talking about, what's happening in the art world, particularly at art fairs as well.
Mhm.
And and then I'll settle in and just check whether there's any works that are coming up for sale, if any auctions have happened, what sort of prices things have sold for. Because all of these works that we deal in tend to go through a resurgence, particularly if the Whitney are doing a retrospective or MoMA. It affects pricing, or it can do quite a lot, and also the time of year too. I spend a lot of time with sort of growing relationships with clients. It's touching base. It's not being, it's sort of, you want to become friendly with them. You want to be trustworthy. You want to be able I've advised clients not to buy works before because I don't think it's right for their collection. And that's important to be truthful in what you do. And so I spend a lot of time building relationships, but I also spend a lot of time talking to my colleague, Christopher, the gallery manager, who is very switched on in terms of the contemporary world, and we talk through ideas. We plan discussions, to have in the gallery with clients. So perhaps I'll talk to a esteemed curator on American modernism and hold a breakfast morning or even a drinks evening where we can sort of educate people in this era.
Wonderful.
And then it's just a case of inventory and looking to speaking to gallerists in New York. We love to talk to them, and we have some great relationships with people over there too. So we keep ourselves busy, but also we like to keep the gallery pristine. I think that's very important to make sure that it is in the best possible shape that it could be. And then unfortunately for me, I have the boring side of things, the financial stuff, paying invoices and sort of and booking things in. But the fun part is things like speaking to the curators about
Mm.
sorry, the conservators, I mean, sorry, about what they've found with certain artworks. It's really good, really interesting to talk through what they've found under UV light, and some of the, like, perhaps there's been some repairs that have been done on a work that we bought. And I love hearing those stories because it's really fascinating to hear what they intend to do with the work. It's a really interesting process. It really is fascinating, and what they do is incredible. And
Yeah.
that what I mean, it takes some time. It takes a few months for an artwork to be cleaned properly because it's methodical. You can't rush these sort of things. But that's an element that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and shout out to Joe Shepherd and Claire Fry, who were the guests on an earlier podcast I did. Who Joe is a contemporary conservator and Claire is a heritage conservator, and they they do lectures on my course, back to back, so that the students, a lot of our students are only into old art, dead art,
Yeah.
as the other students call it, who are only into contemporary. So it's really, really good to hear those ideas from both types of conservator, really. Um,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
James, I think you've already spoken about your forthcoming exhibitions, and So I don't. I think that if someone wants to visit your gallery, do they have to make an appointment, or do they just look at your opening hours on your website?
Yeah, opening hours, we're open Monday to Friday from 10 till 6, and then we're open on Saturdays too from 10
Mhm.
till 5.
Yes,
And
yes,
no appointment necessary. We're a very small, warm, friendly gallery. So
yes.
we really have this we really try and go out of our way to make everyone feel welcome in JC Gallery. And yeah, look forward to meeting whoever would like to come and visit.
Well, I would hope to bring a small group of students down. About how many would kind of that be
Oh well,
maximum
we
number?
we yeah. I mean, we've had 30 in the
Oh,
gallery
really?
before. Yeah, yeah.
I'll be in
For
touch with
talks
you
and
about
things.
the
Yeah,
plans for
please
that.
do, please
Yeah.
do. We actually had for some of our shows, we've had sort of a preview evening, and because we're such a small space, we had people sort of having a drink outside on the street
Yeah,
because there just wasn't
I
any
get that.
space in the gallery, which
Yeah.
is was a lovely,
But
lovely
that
feeling.
always looks good. I always tell my
It
students,
does.
if you can invite lots of people and have them out hanging outside the doorway, and
Yeah.
it looks great. So
Yes.
anyway, James, I personally found this one of the best conversations I've had on this
Oh,
podcast.
thank
It's
you,
just so
David. I
interesting.
appreciate it.
I think partly because it was very different to what, the people I normally speak with on one level. I think it was really good to talk more about a heritage house, and everyone should also look up Althorp,
Yes,
and see when they can visit that wonderful collection. One thing I don't think we said that might astound some people is I think it claims to have the largest collection in Europe
it
of
does.
old
Largest
master.
private art collection. Yeah,
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 yeah, the largest private collection of old
yeah.
masters, which is an incredible statistic.
It's unbelievable. There's one work in at the very end of the picture gallery. If you go, the picture gallery will stay with you forever because it's just such an amazing room. But there's one War and Peace by Van Dyck at the end there, which is on a list of things at number 10 that if it's to be sold privately, it still can't leave the country.
Wow, there you
Yeah.
go. That's fantastic. There's an example. Anyway, James, thank you very much for being a guest on this week's podcast, and good luck with the current show, and then the fourth. Can't wait for the forthcoming one on focusing on Arthur Dove. And thank you
Thank you
for
so much.
introducing many of us to those artists, perhaps for the first time.
Thank you so much. Thanks, David. Really nice to speak with you.